All right. So how do you get started raising money in real estate? I've raised over $27 million for real estate. My friend Ruben has raised millions, many millions for real estate, and he's an exceptional guy. He actually has the Capital Raiser Show. So he speaks with a lot of people that raise capital or raise money for real estate. So if you're interested in how to get started or how people actually do raise money for real estate, you're in the right place. Ruben, how's it going today? Really excited to have you.
Yeah, I'm super pumped up to be here, man. Thanks for having me, Bronson.
Oh, I was excited, man. I really enjoyed being on your show, and you have an awesome show, the Capital Raiser Show, and it was really fun. So, talk to us a little bit about for our audience. Let them get to know you a little bit. Tell us about your background, how you got started in real estate.
It started back in '08. I started a meetup, which is a good authority platform, and was trying to learn about multifamily investing. I'd studied with a few different mentors. Mike Watson comes to mind, Johnny Dessauer comes to mind, and they taught me about this thing called large scale multifamily. So I was like, I got to get into this, like this house stuff, doing houses and raising capital for single family flips is probably not going to get me to the places that I want to go. And this guy shows up in my meetup, and he shows up from San Diego with a bankruptcy, and he lost all his money in spec homes in the '07 or '08 crash, and then was buying like a fourplex every other week. So I was like, how are you doing this, man? Is it cool if I cruise around with you and film you at your projects? You could talk about how you acquired them, like how you built this business, how you raised capital for them. What do you do to negotiate the deals? And sure enough, just by shooting these videos and posting them on YouTube and a bunch of other little platforms, we ended up over, I think 9 months or so, raised like 625,000, or I should say that's what I brought. And that was kind of my intro into capital raising. I knew from a lending background that there were certain things you could say and not say, like what an interest rate might be, or in our case as investors, what your return would be, but we could talk about our general business model. So we had fun with that. And then he and I actually ended up splitting up, and I kind of went back into corporate America with my tail between my legs, made money on all the deals, but like didn't have a partner anymore. And at the time I didn't have this abundance mindset, which is multifamily partners do actually grow on trees. Eventually found my way back into real estate and partnered up with a local syndicator that was doing heavy lift syndications in Tucson and a couple other Arizona markets. And they brought me on board to raise capital for them. And so I was like looking in Joe Fairless's best ever apartment syndication book, and I went right to the capital raising chapter, and it said, hey, start an interview-based thought leadership platform. So I was like, okay, so I think I've done that before with my old YouTube channel. I think pretty sure I can do it again. I'll start a podcast. And since these guys are bringing me on to raise capital, I might as well start the show on the topic so that I can learn about how do we raise capital in syndications, and is that any different than the way that I used to do it, raising joint venture capital for fourplexes? And sure enough, it's a whole different ball game.
Right.
But
hey, Ruben, I'm going to slow you down for 1 sec, because you've dropped about 5 nuggets there that I want to, and I know we can just talk, for a long time, and I just want to make sure people get this. So when you first started, we're going to come back to what you were just talking about with your podcast, because it is a great show. So single family rentals, a lot of people start with single family rentals or flips, or they're doing small. You kind of started with that. And then you said something that was interesting. You said, this is not really going to get me where I want to go. It's really not going to, maybe you kind of alluded to that, the idea that it wasn't really going to get you where you wanted to go. Did you come up with that kind of on your own, or was that something that when you went from there to the fourplexes, was that something you just kind of was a natural transition, or was it because you kind of found somebody that showed up and that's kind of why you transitioned to that?
Yeah, part of it was that, like, in the single family space, I wasn't raising for my own deals. I was raising for other partners, and that didn't pay very well. So when I actually started raising for my own deals with my own partner and became part owner of the multifamily deals we were doing, that helped me scale a lot quicker. So that's part of it. But I think in general, what people think is this: they kind of go through this routine where they start buying houses, and at some point, like maybe they get to 10 houses, they can no longer finance anymore unless they get really creative umbrella loan structures that cover, multiple houses within a portfolio. But it's very challenging to grow that way. So if you are
I lost you there for a second, Ruben. Hopefully you'll come back. Anyway, I wanted to say one thing about what Ruben said that I think is really interesting. A lot of people start with single family and then they think, and that's what I did. I had 4 or 5 single family houses. And then I discovered multifamily. And usually there's 2 ways people get in. It's either through, you have money and you invest passively in deals, or you basically, what you come at it another way. And what you're doing is you are finding a way to use other people's money to go do deals. And it serves people that have money because they don't have to be the ones that manage the deal. If you have 5 or 10 houses, there's a lot to try to manage, a lot to try to figure out. And so also, like he talked about being an authority leader, when you are an authority in that space and you have a meetup, what it allows you to do is you can basically be the person who's explaining how this works. And that's how I actually found my first investor, was at a meetup. I started a meetup actually with a partner, and I had somebody come in and they were basically, a new investor had come in and they saw me there and they said, hey, I want to invest in one of your deals. And I didn't have a deal at the time, but I got coffee with them. And I said, hey, this is what a deal would look like. And it was really a great opportunity to be able to work with them to get an investor for that deal. So that was kind of how I got started. And the first one is always the hardest. That's what I say, right? Like the first million is always the hardest. It's hardest to get your first investor, to get your first deal. But once you get it, it can really allow for something awesome. Okay, so Ruben, you started obviously single family, and you were able to get into multifamily and small multifamily first. Then you scaled up, and there was some time in between. So when you started to scale up, I know we talk about capital raising as being separate from operations sometimes, but how involved were you on the operations of these deals?
So on the operations side, so number one, once I learned about raising capital from limited partners, my team was like, hey man, so we brought you on to raise capital. Where's the capital? Where's the capital? I'm like, dude, I can't raise capital from these people that I haven't spoken to. So I came up with a solution, which is the co-GP. And we brought in some co-GPs, and they brought in about $1 million, maybe a little bit more than that, on a few Tucson apartment complexes and a couple other things that we did, a hotel redevelopment, et cetera, et cetera. But on the capital raising side, you have to have some kind of ongoing duty to stay legally compliant within SEC guidelines. And my duties were a lot about, investor relations and capital raising and partnering, I should say, doing a lot of communications, marketing, branding, redeveloping their websites, those types of things. They're all very labor intensive and technically intensive. So that's kind of where I spent the majority of my time, doing investor calls, meeting people, creating national exposure from the Capital Raiser Show. And that's kind of what I did. So that's how I brought some
I want to make a point on that too. That's really important, that a lot of people that are starting to raise capital, it can't just be, hey, I brought this amount of money and I got paid this amount for raising this money. It's got to be that you're involved in other levels, and it's got to be that the general partner looks at kind of the whole contribution beyond what you're bringing in. And so like what we do is we talk about, there's multiple ways we're involved. Like for our group, we look at deals. Primarily, I'm not the deal finder. Same with you, I imagine. But somebody's finding a deal, and then you're doing your own underwriting. You're going to the property. You're doing your own kind of part of diligence. You always think it's always helpful to visit a property, and then you do want to make sure that it's something that you want to invest in. And then once you decide, hey, I like the story here, I like what this is, then you invest. And of course, having all the calls with investors and basically getting them on board. And then also there's a difference between raising capital and investor relations. Those are 2 separate things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Raising capital is up till the deal closes, and then or getting the money in, and then afterwards it's investor relations. And if you have good investor relations, it really helps you as you communicate with investors to raise more money. So let's talk just for a minute about that. So you start raising money for these multifamily deals, and actually, let's back up one second. You talked about a content or thought leadership platform, right? So you talked about starting a podcast. Now you've had the Capital Raiser Show for years. Why do you suggest that people that are interested in raising capital should have some sort of thought leadership, or some sort of platform that they use, or a book, or some online presence to be able to do that? How does that help you raise money?
Yeah. So exposure and omnipresence, right? So in kind of smaller sales, they talk about you need to hit somebody with 7 contact points before they ever buy your car or washing machine or whatever. In multifamily syndication is probably closer to like 50 touch points, right? So they
true.
need to hear you on a podcast. They need to hear about you from other people that they know. They need to see you on a meetup. They need to meet you in person at a conference. They need to hear constant and ongoing communications from you. And, you know, something else that you said is capital raising. It involves a lot of little pieces, right? So getting somebody's accreditation letter from their CPA, you know, getting them to transfer their money into the account after they've agreed to, walking them through the Syndication Pro portal, getting them into your newsletter and into your ecosystem. All of that stuff is very intensive, and it's a lot of work for like one individual. So you want to start adding some people onto the team that can kind of help you, particularly if you're not savvy when it comes to automations and working CRMs to create drip campaigns. Like, all of that stuff is super intensive, but it is, I mean, capital raising is its own entity. You know, they say that the finding and acquiring of real estate is very different than the finding and acquiring of real estate capital for those things. And if you are very heavy on the acquisitions and construction management and property management side and have like 9 dudes doing that and only like 1 dude raising the capital, it's very mismatched, and it's not going to work as good as you hope. So for the aspiring capital raiser, aspiring syndicator, you have to have even levels of, you know, team members to do certain things, because one person can't do it all. It's just way too much work, I think, me personally.
Right. So a question for that, because I have a meetup that I run in Southern California, the first Wednesday of the month. We have usually about 50 people show up, and I always ask the question, how many of you want to leave your job and do real estate full time? And almost every hand goes up. You know, they may have left their job, maybe not. But there's a big difference between like, I dabble, or, you know, I've raised a little bit of money for a deal, and like, you know what, now actually my passive income or my income from these deals is actually covering my living expenses, which that's I think that's one form of financial freedom, right? When not just when you replace your income, but when you replace your expenses. I realized once I replaced $50,000 to $60,000 worth of my annual expenses, I could leave my job, and I did. And so then I was able to grow in other ways. But for what do you think separates people that are able to do that and people that just like are not quite able to do that? Is it just the decision? Is it just not doing the work? Is it like, what do you think? Because you've interviewed a lot of people, you've been around this for a long time. Like, what are the things that really cause people to be able to do it or not?
So mindset is one, and just the concept that it actually exists. I think the majority of the American public has not been exposed to private placements or syndications or passively investing into other people's deals or how that works. So I think it's a moral imperative for us podcasters to share the message, whether that's actively investing or passively investing. Those are 2 kind of options, but mindset is the other thing, right? So you think about somebody that wants to become financially free, and maybe there's nobody in their family that's ever purchased a $5 million property. So how do you adapt and change your mindset to actually be able to conceive that it's possible for you to take down a $5 million or $10 million property? And part of the hack, I think, for changing that limiting belief is to partner with people that have already done this and realize that they're just dudes that you went to high school with. They're no different than you or I. They're smart and they're very good at what they do, but they're not, you know, godly. They're just human beings that have mortal lifespans. And if they can do it, you know, a lot of people's motto is, if someone else can do it, then I can do it too. Maybe not at Michael Jordan levels, but I can at least play hoop, right?
Right.
So it's the same thing with syndication. If you can just partner up with the right people that have already done it before you and have gone and paved that road for you, just ride their coattails. And that's how you do it. And especially as a limited partner, you just find somebody that's really good at what you want to be good at, or at least in terms of getting the things that you want. And you just hang out with them and partner with them and watch them very closely over time until you get comfortable enough to do business with them.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, I think the idea of mindset really is the separator. And I had a revelation. I think Steve Jobs has this quote, and he says, or he had said, you know, once you realize that the world is made up of things that exist made by people that are no smarter than you, and that basically the whole, I'm butchering the quote, but the whole premise is that everything is changeable, everything is possible, and it's just if we believe it. Or Tony Robbins says, it's in your moments of decision that your destiny is shaped. Once I decided I'm going to leave my job, like, okay, within 12 months, this is it, I'm out, whatever, like I made that decision. And so for some people, they're active and they want to do this actively and they want to raise money. And it starts with going to the meetups, going to the conferences, buying the books, the courses, doing whatever it takes. If somebody's passive, you actually can leave your job passively as well. We've had people do that where they've been able to retire through passive income completely without being active at all, which is really awesome. But I wanted to shift gears for a second.
Let's do it.
Ruben, I wanted to actually talk. This is something as people who raise capital, we've raised a lot of, many million, 27 million over the years. I know you've raised a lot as well. We don't like really talking about this as much, but with the current environment right now, I feel the best place to be is multifamily investing for investors. Because if you sit on the sidelines, your cash, you could be losing 40% of the value of your cash if inflation is actually not 9%, if it's 15 to 18% over a 2-year period. So you could be just losing the money. The confused mind says, no, I've watched a lot of investors now just kind of get stuck in analysis paralysis. But as somebody raising capital, it's getting harder to raise capital for 2 reasons. One is that we have this sentiment from investors where it's getting a little harder and people are like, the confused mind says, no, I'm not sure. I've watched that. A lot of my friends have watched it. It's getting quite a bit harder. And then also the loan to values are changing significantly. So instead of raising 20, 25% down, it's 35 to 40% down. So we're having to raise more capital and get less result of it. Are you seeing that as well? And what would you say to someone who's kind of getting a little discouraged in that process of, hey, it's getting harder and we're having to raise more money to get the same amount of value in the deal?
So I talked to the godfather of syndication, whose name is Sam Freshman, a guy that started investing in the 60s. And he said this thing, he's been through like 8 cycles. It's just been crazy up and down. He said that he bought a building for $1 million back in the 60s, downtown high rise in Los Angeles. And he sold it like a couple years later for $2 million. And he's been through all these cycles. And one of the things that he was pointing out was that same high-rise building is now worth $100 million. So that's very frustrating, I think, for people that have gone through cycles. When they go back and look at their mistakes, what he said is that most people that have gone through a variety of cycles is they have 2 mistakes. I wish I would have bought more, and I wish I would not have sold it so soon. So multifamily is fantastic for a couple of reasons, because we have the ability to force appreciate the value of the property. But in addition to that, during these very challenging economic recessions and calamities that happen, it's a very recession resistant asset class, because the property is not based off of what the neighboring properties are worth. It's based off of the actual income statement, because it's evaluated and appraised like a business, not like a property. So these assets tend to do very well during economic recessions. And yes, it is getting a little bit more challenging to find and raise capital for specific kind of value add multifamily. And, I think for the last 10 years, we've been riding an uphill kind of thing where it's just making more and more and more and more money. And, right now it's starting to slow down a bit because people are scared of the rising interest rates. But the reality is, if you invest now or at any point in any cycle that ever exists, and you just hold that thing, you're going to do very well. Just like Sam Freshman complained that he sold that $2 million building and now it's worth $100 million. So get in now or get in later. It doesn't matter, but hold that sucker as much as you can. Or if you're doing syndications and getting that money out every 5 years, then reinvest it and redeploy it instead of sitting on the sidelines. Because at the end of the day, if you invest into multifamily, whether that's small multifamily or large multifamily or any sub niche of multifamily, you're going to do very well in about 20 years. Your property is probably going to be worth 2 or 3 times as much as it is today, regardless of when you buy in the cycle.
You're right. You know, I think it's there's that old saying that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is today, right? So it's just getting started sooner. And that whole going back to that thing, you know, that we talk a lot about inflation kind of on this channel and this podcast and show. And you know, the idea of just a lot of people are thinking, I'm going to wait until, you know, rates go up and things are going to crash. But I just think, especially in multifamily, I don't think it's really going to happen. There may be a very slight movement down just on valuations, just a little bit. But I think the high cost of holding cash is not worth it. I mean, I'm trying to deploy almost everything I can. Because again, there's some people that think you store up cash and you just wait for a crash, right? And then you put it all in. But the challenge is when they created 40.9% new currency over a 24-month period from February of 2020 to February of 2022, this money is just getting worth less over time. So it's like to deploy it is so much better. Wanted to ask you too, just kind of as we kind of turn the corner here, tell us like, what do you see? Like, where do you see? You kind of talked a little about multifamily investing, but if you were giving advice to someone who's brand new, they're like, I want to do what you do. Like, what would you tell them to do kind of different than what you did? What are some tips that you'd say, hey, these are the first three things you should do?
So if you want to get into passive investing, interview 10 passive investors and 10 different sponsors. Same thing with active investing. If you want to become a sponsor, then go vet 10 different guys before you end up partnering with them as a co-GP or capital raiser within their structure. Because, what's kind of hard to determine is you see people that have good moral, ethical, and spiritual values, and you're like, oh, I want to work with that guy. He seems like he's going to take care of the residents and do a lot of good things. And then you get into bed with them and partner with them. And then you realize that their branding sucks, their marketing sucks, their communication sucks. And you're thinking to yourself, man, like, how could I have failed? Like, this guy's got like all of his ducks in alignment, but you realize that that is not the case. So you want to interview their investors. This particular metric is very important to me before I do business with anybody. I want to know how many of their customers came back, their investors came back to do repeat business with them. Because if the answer is lower than 80%, they probably don't have the greatest investor, how should I put it, experience, right? So when people have a very high retention of their investors, it's because they're doing a lot of things right. And I've met some people that made a bunch of money and didn't reinvest. And the reason is because the investor experience was horrible, right? So somebody gives you their nest egg, $50,000 to $100,000, and you can't get them on the phone or get onto an online portal and see what's going on with their money. And there's you can't be a happy investor if you're freaking out about like what's going on with my money. So that's the first key for me is like, what is the investor retention rate and do they communicate effectively? Not just are they good people in general, but are they good at what they do as well?
Yeah, no, those are two things we talk about a lot is that, as a core value, one of ours at Bronson Equity is the investor experience, right? Making sure that people, it's not just the performance. And we actually had a partner that was a part of a deal and it was great performance, but the communication was terrible. And the experience was terrible because the communication wasn't good. Even though we had just this amazing, like not 2X, but almost 2X in a year, it was like the experience was not great. And I passively invest as well in other things. And so it's interesting how, those two things are very, very important. As a passive investor, it is important to know, hey, how does this group communicate? And you're going to get that from interviewing them and their other investors. And I think what you mentioned is true. And I'd love to know about interviewing passive investors. It's easier to get a hold of sponsors, but how do people find passive investors to be able to interview?
Yeah, that is really very challenging because there's this thing called private placements. And what are they? They're private, right? So some investors don't want to be talking with other private investors because their business is private, right? So, but you can find them, like if you go to passive investing shows, there's a variety of people that have shows specific to helping people with passive investing. I'm pretty sure your show entails some of that. So if you can find some people that are open and willing to talk about it, that's how you do it. But primarily speaking, the way that you do this is by meeting one person that's in a deal and then finding out how much do they love it, and then seeing if they have some friends in it, and being very careful when you talk to other sponsors and asking them, hey, is there anybody in your investment or your recent apartment complex that is a testimony that I can talk to? And if the answer is no, you should be careful about that.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because, in the financial world, most people have an incentive to sell you something. Even myself and even you, like we have incentives to give information based on what our business is. Now, a passive investor does not, right? Now, you and I, we're trying to help people. A lot of times I'll tell people, no, don't invest with us because this doesn't work. You want to make sure it's a good fit and all that. But really, when you get around somebody who all they do is invest passively, and I found you can find these people at local meetups, maybe in your town. Like you said, you go to conferences, but it can be really transformative because you get around people that they really don't care, that they have no skin in the game. They don't have a dog in the fight. They're just trying to make sure they don't lose money, right? Warren Buffett says rule number one of investing is don't lose money, right? And so they'll have some feedback on not only the things they did well, but also the mistakes they made. And sometimes if you ask people not only, hey, tell me about your biggest wins, but tell me about some of what you do different. A lot of people really want to give advice. So, hey, real quick, before we wrap up here, this has been awesome, Ruben. So appreciate you and all the value you bring, man. You just have a wealth of experience. You've been doing this a long time. What's one resource that's really helped you in real estate, whether it's an app, a website, a tool, a book? Is there any recommendations that you can give?
Mentorship, 100%. So particularly the networks that they come with, and leaning on somebody's intelligence, because they can provide you with a lot of things that you may not be good at. For example, my mentor, Annie Dickerson, she explained to me automations and branding and marketing and a bunch of other things. The other thing that's been really good is just going to conferences, particularly like the Jake and Geno's or the best ever conferences of the world. Or, I haven't been to Hunter Thompson's, but I hear those are really good. Rod Cleef has some. There's a whole slew of different conferences. That's like the good place to find partners and meet other people and learn about what it is that you're trying to do. So I would say like conferences and mentors are some of the greatest resources that I've had.
That's awesome. Well, Ruben, I just so appreciate the way that you add so much value. You share very honestly. Thanks. You share about your experience and done a lot of different things for a lot of years. So I really appreciate that. And I encourage everybody to check out your show called The Capital Raiser Show. But anyway, thank you again for coming. If people want to reach out to you, what's a good way that they can connect with you?
So if they're active investors and want to learn about raising capital, thecapitalraisershow.com. If they want to find out about our build to rent deals or our multifamily investments, legacy acquisitions. But if you just want to hang out and you want to do neither of those, like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram are great places to just chill. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, regardless of if you're trying to scale as an investor, an active investor, or as a passive investor. I get a lot more calls from active guys, but I'm happy to help the young guy coming up or the new guy with anything, point you at least in the right direction of where you're trying to go.
Awesome, brother. Appreciate you, man, for so many reasons. I look forward to connecting again. Hopefully having you on in the future again.
Very cool, man. Thanks. It's been a blast.
All right. So this was a great interview, and I like Ruben for a lot of reasons. I always like talking to people that are really experienced and have done what they do for a long time. And you can tell like gives you a clear path. And I think it can be tempting to see this is only for people that actually want to raise capital. But I can see it. There were some real principles that go forward if you want to be a full-time passive investor. And I know people like Jeremy Roll, who have basically quit their job through passive investing full time. And so, they have found a way to find what their expenses are and to be able to replace it, which is absolutely magical, right? And I was able to do it. I was able to do a little more active than passive, but I was able to do it. So one thing I want to really draw out to is the power of mentorship. If you don't have a mentor, having mentors can be super, super powerful. If somebody's done it, it means you can learn from them how to be able to do it. So I'm actually a mentor to people to teach them how to raise funds. We have a group of actually faith-based entrepreneurs, and we talk about how it's called Kingdom REI, how we help raise money for real estate deals or even to find deals. And it's a high-end mastermind. We're just getting around people that are successful, that have similar values is huge. I'm a part of several masterminds, but that's one of them. If you are interested in hearing more about Kingdom REI, you can shoot me an email, Bronson@Bronson Equity, and I can send you some information on that. But anyway, hope you enjoyed this show. This was really fun, and I look forward to catching you on the next episode of Mailbox Money.
You've been listening to the Mailbox Money Podcast. For more free resources, articles, and videos, go to BronsonEquity.com. There you can download your copy of the special report, The Single Best Investment Strategy During and After a Pandemic. None of the information shared here is an offer to buy a specific investment, and this is for educational purposes only. Consult your financial, legal, and tax professionals and use your own common sense before making any investment decisions. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to tune in next time for more Mailbox Money.